Hey everyone, so I'm going to show you in this video how to draw Brr Brr Patapim, the Italian brain rot character. So the first thing just to notice is that the nose is really long in comparison to the eyes. So it's got really tiny little eyes and a long oval nose. And notice how on the left-hand side of the nose, it's in shadow. So I put in some hatch marks to show that that part is in shadow there. From there, notice that the eyes are also have a little bit of shading and that around the eyes, I put some shading in there too. Above the character's head is going to be some trees. So I start by just putting some trunks in that's ultimately going to be shaded in a little bit more. So about halfway down the nose is going to be the mouth. And so notice the line that I'm putting in. It's just a crease that's right by the nose there. And add a little bit of shading just around that area. From there, you can just shade it in a little bit, just adds a little bit of hatch marks around the mouth to make it look a little bit more like the character. So this part you can either just keep in lines or you can add more shading if you like. Okay, so now that we did the face, we're going to do some of the body. And so for the body, a lot of it are roots that turn into the character's feet. So for the roots, what you want to do is you want to just have the roots kind of like intersecting with each other. And there's a lot going on in this section, but it doesn't have to be perfect. You want to just have them kind of going in different directions and maybe like crisscrossing a bit in terms of the roots. So now from here, I'm drawing the feet and the toes, which are pretty much at the bottom of the piece of paper. So I'm working here on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And so what I did was I started the character kind of like at the top left of the paper, and then almost all the way at the bottom are the feet. So the character has kind of like weird proportions, obviously, where it's got these humongous feet. So you just want to make sure that when you're drawing, you have enough room to do that whole, get the proportions right for the feet. So notice the angle of the toenails too, because that'll look more realistic, right? If you get the angles right. So notice on the big toe, the shape of the toe is kind of like sort of a irregular type shape. And using my pen, I'm just darkening up around the toenails to try to show like a little bit more shadow in between the toenails. And in the image, there's some darks around there. So I just want to add some of those darker marks and shadows around the toes. So here I'm just adding even more shadows, and notice like some of the bigger shapes that I'm sort of like pulling out around the toes and toenails. Again, this will just make it look more like the character than if you just draw the toes really basic. So play around with how much shadow that you want to get around the toes. The next thing I'm doing is the veins of the feet, and those are going to be merging with the tree roots. The next thing I'm doing is there's a lot of open space still between the top part with the tree roots and the feet. And so I want to go over a lot of that section with more tree roots to have that be more gradual, to go from the tree roots into the toes. Okay, so next thing we're doing here is we're going to be adding colored pencil using Prismacolored color pencils. And in this tutorial, I'm going to explain all the different colors that I use. And so I'm using a mix of different colors. So on the face, I actually started with like an off-white, and then towards the edge of the face, I'm using browns. And then for the nose, I'm using like a peach color as a base, but then I'm also adding a lot of orange and red to the side to make it look a little bit more like the character. And so make sure that you experiment with like red and pink and orange to just bring out the color a little bit more. Don't just only use the peach color. And then the eyes are actually a little bit greenish, so I added some green to the eyes. Then adding a little bit more brown to like the chin area. Okay, so now we're going to do the tree part. Now for this, the main thing you want to make sure is that you have a dark green and a light green. So I'm using for the dark green more of like a sap type green. And then as you can see already on the top part that I already did, I'm using like a light green and even a yellow to bring out some of the highlights. Okay, so here I'm going over the roots using an off-white color. And now I'm just, again, going back over with the dark green. So you see the light green contrasted with the dark green. And when you're using colored pencils, I recommend in general to kind of like press down quite a bit. And if you do have a good set of Prismacolors, that's better than like the cheaper brand, like Crayola is not as good. So Prismacolors are worth getting a small set if you are interested in colored pencils. I do recommend that brand. So add as much shading as you can because that will give it more dimension and it won't make it so flat. So the roots are a little bit flat, but I'm trying to make the tree area a little bit more visually interesting. So now I'm just going over the roots with brown. Okay, so you can see that I'm adding now some of the green to add in some of like the leafy area that's in between the roots. So make sure you do that because it'll look more like the character because he's got he's got like a lot of like the forest kind of growing out of the roots in the legs. And you can actually really play around with different types of greens if you have a big enough set, because when you use different greens, it'll actually make it look more realistic than if you just use one color. So just going through and adding in a lot of that green. And now I'm just going back through and adding more brown in the areas that I needed to go back over. Okay, so now we're gonna do the feet. So for that, I'm using a peach for like the base color, but then I'm using a few other colors for shadows. So for some of them, I'm actually using a good amount of orange. And then for some of the toes, I'm using as shadows, some purple and also some red. So you'll see that in there. And that'll make the illustration look a little bit more actually like the character. So if you notice the picture, it's actually got some purples in the toes there. And just to point out, you can see a lot of the one of the feet, but the other foot is kind of like you only see part of it. So just make sure that you, in your drawing, you notice that. So that's pretty much how you do it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment if you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.